Hi, I'm John Sauvé, and this is Art and Design. Today, my guest is Peter Werby. Peter, thanks for coming on the show.
Well, this is my second appearance, so thank you.
Oh, well, yeah, because we had to have you back. That's why.
Appreciate that greatly.
Peter, 1967. You were in Detroit.
In Detroit.
There was a lot happening back then.
They used to joke that I never left the city, never went north of 8 Mile Road. I was
Isn't there a movie?
living for the city.
What brought you to the city?
I was born and raised hell there. I went to all Detroit schools, and that's where I lived. When we finally moved to Oak Park, I felt it was a death sentence almost. I'm going to the suburbs.
Did you have to give up your card at that point?
I did. Well, yeah, we actually lived in Highland Park, and it seemed like this was in the early 80s, and it seemed like every time we left the house, someone would break in. And I worked on WRIF at the time as an overnight DJ, and my wife was there in this big house by herself, so it wasn't tenable.
Well, this is kind of the story of Detroit, too.
Sure.
And now, was it 67 you started at, or 66 you started at
the Fifth Estate? 1966, yeah.
Okay.
Harvey Obshinsky began it the year before, and he got the assistance of John Sinclair and the other people in the Artist Workshop, photography by Lenny Sinclair, his partner at the time. And in 1966, he was about to give it up. He walked into a meeting of the Detroit Committee to End the War in Vietnam and said, I have a newspaper and I don't have enough people working on it, and if I don't get a staff, I'm going to have to close it. Does anybody want to volunteer? And my wife and I, Marilyn, said, and what do we say? The rest is hysteria.
So Harvey's got this paper, The Fifth Estate. Did it look like this at the time?
No, now it's a magazine. At one point it was a weekly. Now it comes out 3 times a year, and I always say my goal is a yearly. Just
high aspirations.
Yeah, and it just, as we said at the time, blew my mind when I first saw Harvey and 2 friends hawking this at a blues concert at the University of Detroit in probably 1966. And I thought, how could young kids have a newspaper? Newspaper is what came out of West Lafayette Street, the News and the Free Press, or there were weekly papers and all that, but they certainly didn't have information opposing the war and talking about rock and roll concerts and have poetry and everything else that we featured in the Fifth Estate.
Well, and at the time period, in the city of Detroit, you've got this paper that's on the campuses of Wayne State and University of Detroit, but you also have other cultural events that are coming about, like the Grandy Ballroom.
Right.
And then the Agitator, what's that guy's name again? John Sinclair had a number of different projects too, right? So he had his commune and his White Panther Party, and he's very P.T. Barnum, wasn't he?
Well, he still is. I mean, I was just at his 81st birthday, and he's reading while they have a piano player, and he often he recites his poetry, and there's a band in back of him, and a lot of his poetry is tributes to blues players or jazz players, and but he's recording. He's still doing some recordings. He's writing. He's not writing his memoirs, but he's putting together some of his columns from the Fifth Estate and from, I think it's the Marijuana Newsletter or something like. He was the first person to smoke a joint legally in Michigan after serving 2 prison terms for possession. So he deserved it.
In 1987, I walked into the WKAR studios in East Lansing, and he was reciting his Thelonious Monk poetry, accompanied by a saxophone and a piano player. And I'm like, who is this guy? He is so cool. This is great.
And he's doing...
But the poetry.
Thelonious.
This was not connecting him back to 67. This is walking in going, wow, whoa, what is this? And to this day, I still have the poetry. He gave it to the sax player, a copy of it that he was reading, and I'm like, this is amazing. I loved every bit of it. And the performance, which his whole life is performance, is amazing.
It sort of goes, Thelonious Monk with a big heart that he gave to all the people. His, right?
With a saxophone going, wah, wah.
Yeah. I actually read from my book, John and I appeared at the, what was it, the Unity Vibrations Kombucha Beer Factory in early December. And he read, accompanied by a group, it was put together by the impresario Tommy Spaghetti. And I read from my book, Summer on Fire. And I usually just read straight ahead, but I got into it in the same way that John does. In other words, you read and you go, I don't even know if I can.
Not without a saxophone.
Yeah. No threats, no danger. And then the band would just. So it's great fun.
Well, it's infectious.
Yeah.
When you hang around with characters like that.
Right.
Were you in the commune?
No. I did live in a commune in the 1970s out so I didn't live in a, what was I saying? I didn't, this
But
was.
not in his commune.
Yeah, no, but we, about 6 to 8 of us at different times lived in a huge house out in Avon Township in the middle of the 70s. And it worked well.
Were you writing at the time too?
You know, I was working full-time for WRIF, doing a full-time talk show at night, and there was the one period when I didn't work on the Fifth Estate. But then in 1975, we thought it was going in a bad direction. Myself and some people who had characterized ourselves as the Eat the Rich gang, and we came back and put it back on its radical course.
Good. Way to be there for the people.
Yeah.
So, this time period, again, with the Fifth Estate, there was a hiatus then while you were in Avon Township? Is that what you're saying?
Not of the paper, but of me. Yeah.
Of you,
yeah,
not being
right.
with the
And
paper.
it kept going. It was making some effort to be somewhat, and it was a seminal in that regard, as something like a Metro Times. But we always wanted it to have more of a radical content and more edgy, and both politically and culturally.
So when we're talking about the 60s and radical ideas and, peace, love,
Dope.
dope, there was a lot of dope, wasn't there?
There was.
And
I even knew people that used it.
really
Yeah.
served prison time.
I can't name their names.
But they were supported by John Lennon too, which I thought was,
Yeah.
God, showmanship. Love that guy. He's so good at it.
Yeah.
But the Fifth Estate, these ideas, these values that you espound to, and you said it was, obviously when you have other people, they take it, they have an agenda, and they take it in different directions. But the underlying part of this, we had a brief conversation just before this segment, they're all important values today too,
Sure.
and the Fifth Estate is still here.
Well, I'm sure 90% would, of the people would support 2/3 of that triad, peace and love.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, and probably a good section.
It depends on what the cover of the magazine looked like
Yeah.
before they expound that
Right,
they
yeah.
were in the same peace and love
Yeah.
that you're into.
A lot of people say, well, I don't support dope, and they have a drink, smoke a cigarette, take an Ativan, right?
Yeah, but when they're doing those little gummies, they don't realize it's the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Which it seems to be a very popular thing these days. With a group that was completely against this.
Yes, yeah, it was. Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of the superficial things that were that got people's dander up, the length of our hair, what clothing we were wearing, whether we had a beard or not. I mean, it seems so crazy now. I mean, think about the Beatles in 1964 when they had the mop top, those little haircuts. They had haircuts like this.
Yeah.
You couldn't have hair on your touching your ears and all that. I'm glad they have the air conditioning on, John. It's
We,
what
we try and keep you awake with a little cold air. I don't want you to fall asleep during the interview.
Here's my coat. You notice, folks.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Yeah. Yeah.
So again, this time period where you're writing for the Fifth Estate, you're at seminal moments in Detroit history. Kick Out the Jams. There's been a show about that, hasn't there? Several times?
There has. And there was so much that was new. And one thing, I don't like to beat people over the head with, oh, weren't the 60s cool and all that. There are periods in history that were more intense, more defining than others. I mean, if you think about ones that weren't, for instance, though, 1950s, and you go, oh, that was Ozzie and Harriet. Yeah, it was also Jack Kerouac and Ginsberg and Burroughs and all the rest of those guys, abstract painters. And so you can make any era you're in intense and meaningful and defining.
You can, but you can also write about it in a way that presents it in a direction that maybe not a lot of people were even aware of
Sure.
at the time,
Yeah.
too. Like the book that is an outcropping of you working for the Fifth Estate. I got to put a plug in for Summer on
Sure.
Fire.
Yeah, and Summer on Fire has the characters, the main characters, are Fifth Estate staffers navigating through the hot summer of 1967, which included the Detroit Rebellion and its riots. By the way, for people interested in that period, either if you lived through it or, well, I shouldn't say lived through that particular period, but there's an archive at fifthestate.org where our two archivists are putting online every article ever printed in the Fifth Estate. And so far they've up to 5,000 individual articles that are researchable. So you can go back to that period.
Well, and reading some of those articles, there's a lot of overlap with today,
Sure. Yeah.
which is unbelievable.
I don't know, styles. Sometimes you look at the styles and you think, I wouldn't like to dress like that today. But I would say I've been reading a lot of it lately because we're assembling a full physical set of all the papers, and believe it or not, some of them were missing. So I've been reading them all, and I'm thinking, boy, are we going to say, boy, were we dumb? You know what? For 18 and 19-year-olds, they're pretty smart, I would say.
Well, and just there's so many different directions I can go with in any one time with you, but 18 and 19-year-olds who took life serious and said, hey, my draft card is the only thing standing between me and standing in the middle of some frickin' jungle pit that nobody cares about me. I'm a piece of meat that they're just going to expendable personality.
Yeah.
Whereas 18-year-olds today, I just got done with teaching a class last semester where I'm like thinking of that classroom saying, whoa, what a difference that class and the seriousness of that class versus the seriousness of 18-year-olds in 1967.
Sure.
Who, as I remember as a kid, my dad coming home with a paper. I had 3 older brothers. The 2 of them were of draft age, and they were looking for their number. I remember that morning. I was pretty young, but I remember that morning putting that paper on the counter and just them both going, we got to get these kids in college as soon as possible, because that is the only thing that's going to be between them and being drafted.
And then that stopped.
Yeah, what year did that stop?
I don't know.
It had to be early 70s, though,
Yeah,
right?
I think so. But the Fifth Estate, when it was a weekly, and a good portion of its content was opposing the war in Vietnam, we sent hundreds of papers to active duty GIs in Vietnam, opposing the war, telling them to stop fighting. I mean, we actually advocated mutiny in the armed forces. That war had to end. It was killing Vietnamese by the, literally, here's a question. In fact, Noam Chomsky, the political theorist, he said, when you ask most people, how many Vietnamese civilians died in Vietnam, you get a total blank on people. We know
Right.
exactly, almost, some people can even say the exact number of American dead, 58,000 something. We have a wall with all
Yes.
this. But there were, they don't even know. There are somewhere upwards towards 3 million Vietnamese. So it was every...
There was Cambodians in there too.
Yeah, Indo-Chinese, let's say, yeah. And so to end that, and to end the deaths and injuries of our own soldiers, we do whatever you can to stop. And there were starting to be mutinies.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there was the possibility not only that the U.S. would lose the war, but it might lose its army, and which is one of the reasons they began disengaging. They said, this is not working.
Well, you can't have this kind of filth on the front line, and,
Right.
impregnating their minds with ideas that they are in control.
Well, there was things trying to think of the day, I think 1969, 1970, called national moratoriums, which were these huge marches all over the country. And there would be 20,000 people in Detroit, 100,000 in San Francisco, 1 million people in Washington, D.C., and soldiers, active duty, frontline soldiers wearing black armbands in solidarity with the anti-war movement. So this total lie about how the anti-war movement spit on GIs, I mean, that is a total fabrication. It never occurred. There's a book called The Spitting Image about how this was this manufactured, essentially
Propaganda.
right-wing, trope to besmirch people.
They just got a little better at it
Yeah.
with the internet.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember my older brother's first year in college, and they were worried, my parents were obviously worried, that they were carrying caskets through campus and having these
Right.
protests and talking about relevant things that would affect him if he wasn't in school. And these are real world, like life and death things that you were faced with when the Fifth Estate first came out. And this was a way to have a voice for the people that didn't have a voice.
Sure. And think a lot of coverage of the Black Panther Party, of the League of Revolutionary Black
Wait,
Workers.
are we talking about the Black Panther Party that actually had health care and food and education programs, but we don't focus on that, we just focus on, they got guns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was very threatening to the police. And
What, a black guy with a gun?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I heard that.
I think the police throughout the United States killed like 30 Black Panthers. So
Mm-hmm.
probably, I don't know, I've never heard, if upon revisiting that era, whether any of the surviving ones thought that was the best tactic. It certainly brought them to public attention.
Well, there was also, there was other things in our environment that were accepted but never challenged. And it seems like a reoccurring theme.
Sure.
Accepted but not challenged. And then when you scratch the surface and you go, how can this be? I mean, the hell, Nixon got impeached for this, and we can't get this monkey over here who, geez, every day he does 30 things that are worse than that. So.
And it hasn't changed. This was 2022 was a record year for police killings. You would have thought, well, they would have gone way down. The U.S. police kill about 100 people a month. And you would think, and what race are they predominantly? White, as a matter of fact. Disproportionately people of color, but as with poverty, we always, whites often think of poverty as being a black phenomena, but as I'm sure you know, and most people know, that the majority of people, majority of poor people in this country are white, but again, people of color are disproportionately poor.
Well, again, we're talking about the Fifth Estate right now.
Let's talk about the Fifth Estate.
Well, no, but that brings these issues to light. That we're talking about an alternate viewpoint, which is not really an alternate viewpoint today, but at the same time, it was revolutionary back then to even suggest that the norm could have faults.
Sure.
And what kind of protests did you get from the general population with the Fifth Estate?
Oh, printers who refused to print the paper. We had coin boxes that were confiscated by the police. The Detroit police refused to issue us press credentials, although we had to go to court and got them, finally. Should have brought it.
Yeah.
I just found it.
Show and tell.
Well, let's talk about art and design.
We are. with the Fifth Estate, Peter.
You're supposed to say, hey, dude, it's my show.
God, you just can't help yourself.
Well,
all those years on
but partly,
ABX.
Partly it's that I just don't want people to think that either the Fifth Estate or my book, Summer on Fire, is joyless or without...
Oh, did I give that appearance at all?
No, I do.
Oh.
I am. But yeah, so we always intersected with the arts community and culture. And this, which I love, this is a doorway to 333 Midland, which is this huge artist space. And
In
we put it on
Highland Park?
here
Yeah.
because it says, and it applies to the magazine, caution, do not enter without eye protection. And so, I mean, as an artist, you'd probably want to shoot me at Sunrise for having presenting, particularly a John Egner, who did such large canvases. But you are restricted by the format.
So before you go on,
Okay.
so John, I met him maybe 2008 or 9.
Mhm.
His wife at the time, I might have the dates wrong, but his wife at the time had just taken over for the Folk Art Museum
Sure,
in New York.
she did.
And so John, and I didn't know John's background at the time, but we became friends, and just the nicest character. I
Yeah,
got
he
along
is.
great with him, and we kept in touch over the years. He's since passed, but he was a seminal figure in the art world.
He was indeed.
And if we could, just because we're talking about the arts and the influence of the arts on the Fifth Estate, can we talk a little bit about Egner? Just because I love that guy.
Well, do this for me first. Why won't this guy respond to my questions?
God damn it, I'm talking about John Egner.
All right, if you do a, I'm trying to look here. If there's a painting in it, here, Jesus, this not even have art credit, but usually, oh yeah, here, Hazel C. Klein. So this is a collage. So this is 6 or 7 point type, the height. I wonder how long it took someone to write this article as opposed to doing a painting, right? And so what we've tried to do is give little biographical sketches of every art, and we don't call these illustrations because that means it's illustrating the article, but rather they're a separate statement in a different medium on the subject. John Egner.
Which is you being presenting this as it is, which is a work of art.
Yeah.
And that's also the attention to detail that the Fifth Estate has always been about, presenting new ideas, and whether it be through words or images. And again, I commend you that this paper is still in existence, and I know it's a passion project for you, but the idea that it's always been here, and that you can go to the archives, which you put a plug in for that earlier, that's amazing. I did go back and look at some of the stories, and I'm like, so great to have this and have it available, not only for my gratification, but also for people that are doing research on a time period. It captures this time period so well as everything that came after from the perspective of the Fifth Estate. I got to put a plug in for people that want to see that archive.
Oh, at fifthestate.org, and then there's archive in the top menu. I just visited John Sinclair the other day, and I brought him a huge collection that someone had given me of articles about him and the White Panthers and Translove Energy and the Artist Workshop, all of that. And he actually got irritated. He said, they got it wrong in every single one. And you know what? And I said...
That's from what he remembers, that's all.
No, they're right. I mean, these, no matter how sympathetic these mainstream reporters were, they weren't of it, so they didn't get it. And they always made errors, oftentimes almost embarrassing errors. Whereas when you read Fifth Estate articles, and you could say there's, it could be a flaw in that, too close to it and all that, but these were participant and in what we call engaged journalism. So we're not, quote, objective. And objectivity in presentation of particularly of news is total BS. I mean, you can't. And you
never existed.
You can give me a set of facts. I used to write a lot for the Metro Times, and if I was writing about Fermi 2, the nuke plant, And once I
Your spin's going to be different, yeah.
yeah, well, one time they told me, what they always say, you've got to show, not tell. So, because I was editorializing in what was supposed to be a news article, and I figured out it's all how you position things, who has the last word, and all of that. So I would write about Fermi 2, which I think is an environmental disaster, and even though it had the appearance of objective journalism, came out with essentially with my point of view.
Well, you know what William Randolph Hearst always said? Don't believe what you read on the internet. Pretty sure he said
Yeah, he was very prescient.
yes.
Yeah.
This passion project of yours, it's amazing that it still exists. And like you said, it's 3 times a year, but it still exists. It's still here. And the feel of it, the mode of it, I mean, is it holding up to what you originally started with?
Oh God, I don't know. I mean, it's changed so much. I know one of the things is that it's put me in touch with the most interesting people of this several generations that I've gone through, including you, John. I mean that very seriously.
Huh?
Yeah, yeah.
You're having a slow day.
Yeah,
It's a Tuesday.
I do. Well, but take the compliments where they
Thank you.
come. And also with the most exciting ideas. I mean, they're a lot more easily available now, as you said, through as Hearst said, you have the internet. But back before then, you know, where did you get your ideas? In the 1960s, when things would happen, like the Cuban Missile Crisis, I just knew instinctively this was not the whole story. And my wife and I would wait till we got this weekly publication called The National Guardian, which was a left-wing publication. And we go, okay. And there weren't any other sources available. So now there's just your, what?
Inundated.
Inundated, overwhelmed,
And
awash
too many
in-
opinions.
And you know who this has worked out the best for? The right wing.
Mm-hmm.
The right wing
Muddies the water.
they never could coalesce.
Mm-mm.
Because, you know, think about this. This is a little aside about the right wing. On January 21st, 2017, 1 million women came to Washington, D.C. to affirm women's rights, which they correctly saw were going to be under assault. On January 6th, 2021, 20,000 insurrectionists occurred. There was more than 20,000 women at the Porta-Johns
Right.
in their march. So they don't have a lot of,
It's all how you present it.
they have about a third of the population.
More lawsuits, though.
Yep.
One last thing, Peter.
Yeah.
How can people find the Fifth Estate again?
Well, it's mostly now, I can't send them to news dealers. There's a few around the...
But there's a website.
There's, yes,
was your
fifthestate.org.
cue, yeah.
And hey, if you subscribe for, I think, $25,
There's a T-shirt and a book.
a book, a T-shirt, Alan Franklin's Lives of the Saints, lots of other books and stuff.
Fifthestate.org. Thanks, Peter. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, John. Great.